more on divergent plate boundaries. If we look at where the divergent plate boundaries are in the world, a lot of times they're running either right down the middle of the ocean or at least in very isolated parts of the ocean. But there are some exceptions worth noting. One of the divergent plate boundaries is actually opening up the Gulf of California in Mexico, and we'll talk more about that later. And also there's a divergent plate boundary right offshore of Oregon called the Juan de Fuca plate boundary. But also a couple of other ones to note here. If we look at this divergent plate boundary running right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it actually goes right through a landmass, which is called Iceland. Iceland is actually right on a divergent plate boundary. And also there's this divergent plate boundary that's cutting through a continent here, and that's the East African Rift Valley, and we'll talk about that one as well. So let's start with Iceland. If you go to Iceland, you're actually able to see a divergent plate boundary up close and personal. Iceland has lots of geothermal activity because that magma is almost to the surface right at where Iceland is. And we can actually map this purple area is the divergent plate boundary through, it's the axial rift area, the axial rift through Iceland itself. And you can actually see it on the ground there. There's some people for scale, and this crack in the ground on one side is the Eurasian plate, and on the other side is the North American plate. And eventually these things are going to be at the bottom of the ocean as this continues over time, and those rocks continue to move. Just another picture here. You can walk right through the Rift Valley, one of the few places in the world where you can actually touch two different plates as they move in different directions away from each other, the North American and the Eurasian plate. A really exciting place to visit. The other example I wanted to show of a divergent plate boundary where it actually occurs in continental material as opposed to oceanic material is the East African Rift Valley. And as we can see, the East African Rift Valley, it's somewhat irregular, but it includes the Red Sea. That's part of the East African Rift Valley. But it also includes this rift area through Eastern Africa, including countries like Kenya and Tanzania, where some of the oldest human remains have been found. So these rift valleys, it's eventually going to tear the continent of Africa apart, and a new ocean will form where the Red Sea and this rift valley occurs here. And this is just a picture of the East African Rift Valley. This material on this side eventually is going to be part of one continent. Material on this side is going to be part of another continent. And this new material that's forming here is going to be a future ocean millions of years from now.